But first, some numbers to show the enormity of what we're dealing with. People with disability can be classified as having profound, severe, moderate or mild core activity limitation. Some of the disabilities that we classify as profound or serious can include cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, autism spectrum disorders, deafness, blindness and pronounced intellectual disability. There are in fact in Australia approximately 1,145,000 people with either a profound or serious disability. That's about the entire population of Adelaide. Such a disability affects 1 in 24 children aged up to 14 years. Over 50% of 319,000 children with disability have a profound or severe core activity limitation. And then there are the carers. In 2003, approximately 2.5 million people reported providing informal care to a person because of disability or old age. This is the population of Adelaide plus Perth. 500,000 people were the primary care of a person. This is the entire population of Tasmania. Primary carers are likely to be in the poorest 2/5 of all households. 55% receive income support as their main source of cash income. Most carers are women. Most primary carers are women. People with mental illness experience even higher rates of unemployment and even lower rates of labour force participation than those even with sensory, speech and physical disability. The poverty rates of people with disability have been growing, and today more than 30% of households which have a person with a disability live on less than half the median income. And yet these same people pay the highest price for the basics of living, for the basics of an ordinary life. Economists believe that the impact of disability can amount to around 30% of household income. It is not an exaggeration to say that 2 million Australians are affected every day by disability. This is about the same number of Australians who belong to a trade union, and they're much less organised. Because I'm speaking from experience when I say this, I just wish that disability was as well organised as the union movement. When I left the union movement and came to the disability portfolio in 2007, I was, like most Australians, oblivious to the entrenched discrimination. It's no secret that in my previous life I stood up for workers who'd been injured at work, but I realise I can't claim to understand that I did not understand the scale of the problem in Australia, or how hard it was for people so traumatised, so sidelined, so injured, so internally exiled by our own nation to get the help that they need. I shared the same out-of-sight, out-of-mind attitude of too many other people. You could say, perhaps I was colourblind, that I didn't see the intricate varieties of life that I, as a union leader and now a Member of Parliament, was necessarily involved in as a functioning part of our democracy. This attitude and the passive discrimination that comes with it is, I think, one of the main reasons why people with disability are often defined by their disability and not by their unique humanness. Why a whole and natural life is withheld from them or seems impossibly hard to reach. It is why they are still not participating in what Australia has to offer. Impairments are a fact of life. They arrive at birth through life's genetic lottery. They take hold of us in a car ride or a swim in the surf that goes devastatingly wrong. They slowly permeate us as we grow old. In a sense, impairments are not what disable people. What disables people is society's attitude towards impairment, an unrevised version of the different, an unwillingness or inability to contemplate the different, to imagine its challenges and possibilities, and to recognise what is similar and humanly familiar. Australians with disability face a prejudice which is entrenched, systemic and subtle, though still at times overt and openly abhorrent. They face it every day and it shapes their experiences and responses and how they travel through the world and life. To the difficulty that you may have in walking, seeing or speaking is added the treatment you receive, the averted eye, the turned back, the over-polite response and cadences suiting a kindergarten child, be it on a bus, a workplace, a job interview, in a shop or at school. The idea that when you're a carer of a person with a disability, that you must be either family or professional, not that you could be a friend. I've spoken to mothers with 2 disabled children who've been approached by strangers in shopping centres and asked outright, "Why did you have the second child?" The following quote came up through our consultations on the National Disability Strategy. "A bugbear of everyone who loves someone who's disabled is that they are labelled according to their disability or weakness. So my son is known as speech impaired. That is his label. Which is like telling someone who's totally beautiful but has big feet that they're primarily identified as having big feet, and the fact that they happen to also be beautiful is lost. Can we focus a bit more on addressing the strengths so that John Smith, the disabled boy, can become John Smith, the brilliant rocket scientist?" Here's another from someone who became disabled as an adult. "My experience changed the day I went out for the first time with a visible impairment. I was 28 years old and I went to a large community event I'd attended annually for some years. A woman rushed up to me and spoke to me in a tone of voice that one might use speaking to a very young child. I wondered why no one else had ever done that in all the years I'd come as an able-bodied person. Surely it was wonderful that all of us had come. Most of us believe that our jobs define us, and so of course do the impaired. 13% of them have university degrees, but this often doesn't help. 63% of blind or visually impaired find it goes against them when they're looking for a job. Those with mental illness usually decide not to tell their employer. Many found, as one said, they had to undergo well-meaning but restrictive measures under the guise of the duty of care. No longer being allowed to drive a work vehicle meant the loss of a portion of my independence, even though there were no restrictions on my driving outside of work. The psychological impact was that for the first time I started to feel like a disabled person rather than a person with a disability. Believe me, they're very different feelings. Access to public buildings or transport always was and continues to be a major issue. Their access to public or government buildings matters less because they spend so little time in them than their access to shops and cafes and restaurants. The people always have to go back through the goods lift or go back through the kitchen to go to a restaurant, feel a constant sense of being demeaned. The people I speak of are real. They don't ask for a ramp to the top of Mount Kosciuszko. They do expect, however, to be able to get into the local library or the local community centre. They are, in fact, the last of the invisible marginalised groups whose suffering is overlooked by the broader community. They are more likely to be in prison. This issue is of a huge concern to me. Susan Hayes at the University of Sydney found that 20% of the people in the prisons of New South Wales, that's 1,800 prisoners, had an IQ below 70, which represents an intellectual disability, compared to 1 or 2% of the general population. What is it that we're doing wrong that turns so many people with a low IQ into criminals? What is it we're doing wrong as a society to let so many people with an intellectual disability to end up in and out of the prison system? Is it that they're developing antisocial and aggressive behaviour because of the way that they were treated? Maybe. Is it to do with the accommodation that we put them in, which makes them hard to live without dignity and self-respect? Possibly. Is it to do with our not allowing them or encouraging them to enter the general workforce? Almost certainly, I'd say. I've been thinking about this and I've come to some conclusions, and I make no apology 16 months in for seeing disability as an issue not purely of resource allocation, but of basic civil rights. I believe it's the last frontier of practical civil rights in this country. And perhaps after 2 and a bit centuries we may reach that frontier. Rights remain theoretical, and there are some good laws on the books, especially for people with severe or profound disabilities and their carers, without adequate access to robust and specialist service systems. To take a simple example, if someone was told they couldn't get on the bus, the train, the taxi, the aeroplane because of their sex or old age or the colour of their skin, there'd be an outcry. But if someone's able to get on the bus, the train, the taxi, the aeroplane because their wheelchair won't fit, because they won't pay the second airfare for a carer, we make no comment and we turn the proverbial blind eye.